there's a documentary called The Social Dilemma, which spoke about how social media is responsible for polarizing the whole world, which is a theory I'm deeply convinced about. And I think that one can only break out of that sense of polarization through conscious self effort. But you can't expect that from the masses of any country, be it America, Bangladesh, Japan, whatever. I think the whole world is becoming a little more polarized. And especially in situations like whatever we saw in Bangladesh over the last month, I think social media has played a role in terms of elevating emotions and elevating fervor that led to this kind of a protest throughout the nation. I think the conspiracy theory associated with America in Bangladesh is that could it be that America wanted the removal of Sheikh Hasina in order to kind of softly take over Bangladesh and make them a bit of a colony? Was Bangladesh just getting too strong because of Sheikh Hasina's presence? Uh, something along these lines.
Yeah.
Therefore, did America affect the social media within Bangladesh to escalate that situation?
Yeah.
This is not my thought process, but this is where the conspiracy theories arise from. No, you want to talk about St. Martin's Island? Anything?
No, so look. Firstly, I mean, there's no doubt that the power of technology today has allowed for spontaneous transmission of inflammatory material to lead to sudden social upheaval. And you see this with the number of revolutions over the last decade that have occurred in Egypt, in other parts of the Muslim world, in Ukraine in 2014, and in Bangladesh today. So there's definitely a role that can be ascribed to the fact that, before the rise of social media and tech that really allows for an idea to spread like wildfire, virality as we talk about, it was difficult to just get the message across. You almost had a natural dampener for these sorts of social upheavals, that people just wouldn't hear the message at the scale and at the pace that you need for true social upheaval to occur. Now you've got that ability, right? You've got the tools that if you get the message right, and if there's some existing frustration that you're tapping into, you can cause a poor, uneducated population to resort to extremes and to violence. That said, let's test the theory, right? Let's be open to the theory that the Americans have gone out of their way as a matter of policy to influence the way this tool of social media is being deployed in Bangladesh to cause the ouster of Sheikh Hasina for some strategic purpose, right?
Could we first talk about the possible strategic purpose?
Exactly. And so the way I was going to test whether or not, that's a likely possibility is to ask myself, what could America's strategic purpose be? And how much of a priority would that strategic purpose be, right? I mean, is this like a top 3 thing that American policymakers are thinking about, like what's going on in Bangladesh, or is it not? And I mean, my first answer is, especially given what's going on in the world, I really doubt anyone high up there in the US government was paying attention to what's going on in Bangladesh. I don't think that American hard or soft power is affected at a global level, whether Sheikh Hasina is in power or not. If you just take a step back and look at the dashboard for an American policymaker today, they have a major war in Europe against their only, sort of great power adversary, Russia. They have an incredibly unstable Middle East. Again, a tinderbox waiting to explode, especially given recent events over there. And in Asia, they have a resurgent China that in many ways didn't enjoy significant influence in Bangladesh precisely because of Sheikh Hasina. So it is the Bangladeshi opposition that actually, one could argue, has closer ties to the Chinese rather than Sheikh Hasina, who clearly had much closer ties to the Indians. And so this is again pure speculation, because I'm surely not an American, foreign policy maker. But my analysis would be that, given the geopolitical context in 2024, the Americans are heavily invested in India's success. And so I would be very surprised if the Americans would go after an Indian ally in Bangladesh in order to create instability on the Indian border, especially given the Bangladeshi opposition is quite close to China. And so, it feels to me much more in American strategic interests to have a strong and closely allied Bangladesh to India.
What about China's strategic interests?
Exactly. And so a far, more obvious bet, if one had to argue that external influence has been relevant to what's happened in Bangladesh, is actually China. China conducts significant foreign operations. China truly is ideologically neutral. They don't go and impose their ideology on African nations or Southeast Asian nations. It's a very transactional relationship. And, the Chinese have significant strategic interests in trying to slow India down. Even if they're trying to delay or postpone a direct confrontation with India, they have a lot to gain from India's economic growth becoming slower, more fraught, more challenged. They have a great strategic interest in minor instability in India, riots, civil disobedience, social upheaval. And the weak points are our two neighbors. If you create instability in Bangladesh, or if you change the government in Bangladesh such that it's more pro-China, less pro-India, that's a huge strategic victory for the Chinese. Because if you end up in a situation where this new Bangladeshi government, for example, is heavily pro-Chinese, the Chinese now have access to an enormous coastline, significant harbors, significant ports, significant naval installations, all in the Bay of Bengal. Which, by the way, strategically is incredibly important because they're no longer blocked off at the Straits of Malacca. So our ability to effectively interdict Chinese supply by saying that we can blockade the Straits of Malacca because they need to come all the way from East Asia to be able to enter the Bay of Bengal and access the Arabian Ocean and then conduct trade with the rest of the world, will no longer be in a position to do that because they would have ports and harbors in the Bay of Bengal itself. So, I don't really know why the Indian internet enjoys conspiracy about the United States as much as they do. And look, this is not to defend the United States at all. Just to be clear, the United States has done all kinds of things that will shock your audience all over the world. I just don't think that is likely to be the case in this situation. I don't see enough of a... So let's assume, you mentioned the island of St. Martin. Let's assume the Americans thought it was really important that the island of St. Martin got militarized. If you ask me, it's much more likely that an American policymaker will pick up the phone and speak to Dr. Jaishankar and say, boss, make sure that the Bangladeshis allow you to build a base on this island so that we together are able to kind of act as a strategic deterrent vis-a-vis China. It's much less likely that the Americans would say, let's destabilize the entire nation so we can end up with a military base on an island. And in the meanwhile, we might have actually let the Chinese into a nation that otherwise the Indians were maximally influential in. So to me, it just feels very, very unlikely that in this case, the CIA has been responsible. And just to make sure that you understand, this is no general comment. So, for example, I'm entirely convinced that the Americans were responsible for the 2014 ouster of the democratically elected president in Ukraine. Pretty clear evidence that Western money and influence supported that popular revolution, the color revolutions, as they say. I just don't see, but you can clearly see what the Americans are going after there, right? Because it's Russia, it's NATO, it's the EU. We know the history of that conflict. The Americans are clearly involved. It's been a major issue in US domestic politics. So you really need to be able to do a comprehensive analysis of a nation's intent, their domestic politics, how foreign policy is made, what's the rest of their geopolitical context, before arriving at this conclusion that, the Americans have done this, right? So there's a general temptation, I'll just end this section by saying this, there's a general temptation, I think, when we're with, observations of geopolitics, where either you'll find people who say, if I've not read it on BBC, if I've not read it on CNN, it's not true, full stop. And then you've got people that are just waiting for the next conspiracy theory and saying, yes, that feels correct. And it almost feels like something in human instinct, that you've got the people that naturally gravitate towards conspiracies and people that naturally gravitate towards the opposite, saying the conspiracies are typically impossible or unlikely. What I tend to do is kind of try to create a balance between the two, right? So as I say, make sure that you're speaking from evidence, but at the same time, make sure that you accept that, look, there are things that one can speculate about, but acknowledge that those are speculations. But there's, things that seem more or less likely, and you have to be capable of balancing both of those.
Hey, if you enjoyed today's clip, make sure you check out all the other clips we've uploaded on this channel. You'll find a clip related to almost every single topic as long as you're willing to search for it.